Good afternoon, everyone. Um, welcome to today's talk. If everyone's ready, it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Giacomo Luciani today. Giacomo Luciani leads the Master in International Energy at the Paris School of International Affairs at Sciences Po. He is an adjunct professor of interdisciplinary studies at the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva. And from 2010 to 2013, he was Princeton Global Scholar at the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs, and the Department of Near Eastern Studies at Princeton University. His work is focused on the political economy of the Middle East and North Africa. With Hazem Bablaoui, he edited a book on the rentier state, published in 1987, which is frequently cited as one of the origins of the concept. In the subsequent work, he has focused on the linkages between evolving sources of government revenue and democratization, on the emergence of a GCC bourgeoisie, and on the economic causes of the Arab Spring. He recently finished editing a book on combining economic and political development, which discusses which economic policies may support democratic transitions and address popular expectations. And today, Professor Luciani will be talking to us about the regional civil war in the Middle East.
Thank you very much. I don't know whether this is needed or not, but thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here at the Middle East Institute. It's my first visit in this place. I hope it's not the last. And today I will be sharing with you some thoughts about what I call the Arab regional civil war. This is something about which I have not yet, so to speak, written in a systematic fashion. I have hinted at this in a couple of articles, of recent articles, but it's thought in progress, so to speak. So I thought I would take this opportunity to discuss with you and present some ideas which you might take as being preliminary and tentative and waiting for confirmation or rejection down the road. What do I mean by Arab regional civil war? We know that we have at the moment 4 civil wars being fought in the Middle East. There is a civil war in Syria, one in Iraq, one in Yemen, and one in Libya. And now the question is whether these are separate, distinct phenomena, each to be discussed in its own separate merit, or to the opposite, which is my impression, whether these are just 4 open fronts in a civil war that encompasses the entire region, including countries that are not at the moment actively involved or do not appear to be actively involved, but in fact are so either by proxy or indirectly or waiting to be engulfed, unfortunately, in the violence. This reflection is based on the idea, which I have maintained for a long time, that in this region, what is peculiar about this region is that all domestic politics is regional, and all regional politics is domestic. It means that countries cannot be indifferent of what happens in neighboring country. Actually, they are immediately affected. Domestic equilibria are immediately affected by political developments in neighboring countries, which has the consequence that meddling in each other's affairs, so to speak, is a necessity, and it's almost inevitable. We don't have the same in any other region of the world. If you look at European politics, we have many difficulties within the European Union, but, you know, governments or heads of state of different, coming from different parties, from different political backgrounds and ideologies, normally conduct business with each other more or less effectively. But, you know, the fact that you might have a Christian Democrat in Germany is not perceived as a threat by a socialist president in France, and so on and so forth. It may be a nuisance, but it's not a threat for a socialist president. The same is true in Latin America. The same is true in this region. In the Middle East, that's not the case. People just feel that they cannot tolerate a Muslim Brotherhood president in Cairo, or a Shia prime minister in Baghdad, and react to these developments. They cannot tolerate a democratic transition without this being, in one country, without this being interpreted as a threat to institutions and stability in another country. So why is that? There are, I would say, instrumental reasons. The fact that media are really regional, thanks to commonality of language. This is to an extent, again, which is pretty much unparalleled elsewhere in the world. But we have other cases of regions that share the same language. Latin America, most of Latin America is Spanish-speaking, and yet this does not lead to the same kind of compenetration of political trajectories as we have in the Middle East. In the Middle East, political forces as well are regional, in the sense that the major political forces that we can detect in the landscape today have dimensions that surpass the individual state, and frequently the same forces are present, albeit in different forms, in more than one state in the region. And they are not necessarily present everywhere, but they are present in many forces. So we may say that political forces have a regional character. Of course, behind all of this is the fact that there is an Arab identity which coexists, overlays what we can call state-specific identities. I hesitate to call them national identities because, in fact, when it comes to places like Qatar, I'm not convinced that there is anything like a Qatari nation, or even, for that matter, a Saudi nation. Those are, states, and people belong to the same state, to the same citizenry, and they have interests in common. But whether they have an identity in common is something that is quite questionable. So there is a regional Arab identity that, notwithstanding the demise of Pan-Arabism a long time ago, continues to exist and plays an important role in the conscience of individuals and in the politics of the region. So I think on this basis that what we see is that, okay, there are 4 civil wars, 4 active fronts, so to speak, but everybody is involved in these wars, whether because of direct intervention of military forces, which is the case for Saudi and Emirati military forces in Yemen. Of course, there has been a military intervention on the part of Saudi Arabia in Bahrain that barely needs to be mentioned. And there is active intervention, although at a lower scale, in Syria. There is an intervention, at least of Emirati forces in Libya to some extent, and there are supplies of weapons, and there is, of course, an intervention of Hezbollah on behalf of the Assad regime in Syria. So I think it is fair to say that everybody is involved. Of course, there are also outside players. Now, whether Iran is an outsider or an insider is open for debate. I tend to view it as an outsider, which is because it does not share in this Arab identity. And I think it is playing a role in many of these wars, certainly in Syria, but obviously also in Iraq and in Yemen, maybe not in Libya, but obviously in Bahrain and so on. But I regard it as an outsider. Russia, of course, is involved at a lower level because the US administration and European governments have not had any appetite for direct intervention lately. Also the Western countries are involved. Now, what is important is that the outcome of any of these four open wars will affect the entire region. So it is not possible to aim at solving, quote unquote, say the Syrian situation, whatever it might mean. What does it mean to solve the Syrian situation? I mean, we can reach a cessation of hostility, we can reach an end to the atrocities, but what is left is a country in ruins, and so there has to be something more than just a cessation of hostilities. There has to be a plan for the future. And there immediately you see that there is an issue of who does what kind of future there is for Syria, what kind of regime we have for Syria. We can dream of a nice democratic regime, but whatever solution you have in mind, you might have in mind, this is something that is going to affect the entire region. It will have immediate consequences in Lebanon. It will have immediate consequences in Iraq, for that matter. It will have immediate consequences in Saudi Arabia. Each of these parties are deeply involved in the conflict and therefore will be affected by its consequences. What are the battle lines? I see four main forces at play and fighting, each fighting against all others, and that is what makes life extremely difficult. The first divide, obviously, is Shia versus Sunni. This has been discussed at length. It is a fact that the Shia have not been properly integrated in any of the Arab countries. There is an issue of integration of the Shia, whether they are a minority in terms of numbers, the population, or a majority. There has been a Shia grievance everywhere. From Lebanon, where it has been there for the past 40 years, to Saudi Arabia, to Bahrain, to Syria, where it has taken a different form, but certainly Iraq and so on. So there is a Shia camp, and that is nowadays divided. In the case of Iraq, the Shia is not unanimous there, but nevertheless there is a basic cohesion of the Shia when it comes to relations with Sunni forces of any color and kind. And then we have three main forces in the Sunni camp, if you wish. The Sunnis are more deeply divided than the Shia. You have what I call the sultans, that is, the kingdoms or Emirates in which political power is held by a family, and this family has a kind of arrangement with religious forces that underpin and support the legitimacy of the family's rule. This is very evident in the case of Saudi Arabia, but it is also the case for places like Morocco or Jordan, maybe less so in Kuwait or in the Emirates, but in all of these places, basically the legitimacy is justified by a pact, a relationship between a ruler that claims some kind of religious legitimacy, but is not what it should be, that is a caliph, and therefore does not quite have this religious legitimacy, okay? So whether he calls himself the custodian of the two holy mosques or some other invented claim to religious legitimacy, that is not there. The second camp is the extremist Islamists that in my notes I call the takfiri because they are intolerant. That is what justifies them. Today it's Daesh or the Islamic State, whatever you want to call it. But you know, I find that it is rather superficial to say that Daesh is the enemy. The enemy has been around with different manifestations for earlier than Daesh, and will continue to exist once Daesh is crushed. If, as it is likely, eventually it will be crushed. It is a component in the political thought of the region, and basically what it looks for is a truly legitimate religious power structure. So subordination of politics to religion, and a combat to some form of caliphate, recreation of some form of caliphate. And then the third component is, of course, the Muslim Brotherhood, which we may identify as being moderate Islam, but, you know, Islam and religiously inspired nevertheless, and that is better known and has been around for a while and will continue to be around for a while. And as we know from electoral results in places where elections, decently fair elections have been taking place, the Brotherhood has substantial following and is a force to be reckoned with. There are other less important forces. There are other religious minorities. These are generally preoccupied with their own survival, so they tend to ally with their best, most promising protector at any moment in time, and which leads to things like, you know, the Syrian Christians being largely in favor of maintaining the status quo with the Assad regime because they are afraid of what might come thereafter. We have the Kurds, of course, play a role in both Iraq and Syria. And, however, it's not clear that they have that there is truly a Kurdish unified strategy. Actually, I would say the opposite. It seems to me that there is no common plan or leadership in between the Kurds in Turkey, in Iraq, and in Syria. And so that it's not clear where they are heading at the moment. And finally, there are some liberal or secular Democrats. These are few. They are generally incapable of winning elections whenever there are elections, and have a tendency to, again, go for the lesser evil, which means in the case of places like the GCC countries, ally themselves with the existing power, although they do dislike several aspects of the existing regimes, because they know that if they really pushed for democratic institutions, they would be losers, and so no one has desire for committing political suicide. In all of this, you might say that by far the strongest political force on paper should be the ruling families of the GCC, plus, if you wish, Morocco and Jordan. They have the money, at least the ruling families in the GCC, notwithstanding the low price of oil. They are by far better off than anybody else. And they have military tools, and so they should be by far the dominant force. They have a tendency, however, to pick a quarrel with everybody else, which we have seen in recent years. At least the Emirates and Saudi Arabia have been absolutely intolerant with respect to the Muslim Brotherhood being in power in Egypt, for example. The Qataris, of course, have taken a different position on this, but they have been pretty much isolated in the GCC context, and they are not too influential. I mean, Qatar is such a small country. And so that has prevented a possible, axis that might have managed the process of partial democratic transition in the region. The ruling families in the GCC have a problem in coming up with a regional integration solution, a policy that would offer some regional integration benefits to the rest of the region, to the rest of the countries. They have been unable to overcome the contraposition between rich and poor states in the Middle East that Malcolm Kerr and Said Yassin wrote about 35 or 40 years ago, okay? This contraposition between rich and poor states keeps coming up, and there is no credible solution to it. We see this in the GCC itself, which is a regional integration institution that has obvious limits. The GCC has attempted many times to pursue a common market for something as simple as a common market or a common external tariff, and they have not been able to truly come up with it. There is no there is absolutely no acceptance of anything that is even mildly supranational among these countries. After the Arab Spring, King Abdullah came up with the idea of Gulf unity, but this was immediately perceived by the other GCC members as an attempt on the part of Saudi Arabia to take over lock, stock, and barrel, and so it has gone nowhere. There has been this idea of integrating Jordan and Morocco into the GCC, and that has not gone anywhere. So the GCC has a manifest incapability of fixing or making any positive proposal towards their neighbors. Relations with Yemen are especially telling. Yemen has been a problem for 20 years, at least for the GCC, if not longer. It's obvious that you cannot isolate a populous and extremely poor country like Yemen in the proximity of rich and prosperous countries like the rest of the GCC without some tension happening. And yet, this has not led to any constructive attempt to integrate Yemen in the GCC. Officially now, there is a request from the part of Yemen, at least of the government supported by Saudi and Emirati forces, to become members of the GCC. But yeah, I think it's fairly evident that any such step would be highly problematic for the rest of the GCC. The only thing that they seem capable of doing is to support weak clients in the neighboring countries, failed puppets. It's almost pathetic how Saudi Arabia kept on supporting Mubarak to the very end, when it was very clear that there was no future for the Mubarak presidency. And now they are supporting an equally weak government in the person of President al-Sisi, whose economic policies are obviously leading the country nowhere, and it's becoming quickly a basket case, which the GCC countries must support by the tens of billions every 6 months, and for how long this is. It's this inability to accept any real leader in the neighborhood that characterizes the situation. It's as if they were afraid of, and probably they are afraid of, the potential political competition that, you know, a credible leader might raise against the patrimonial monarchies in the region. So we have a civil war, and it's a war of everybody against everybody else in these four forces, and one really cannot easily see an outcome for it, an outcome that is positive for the current juncture. Any scenario for the future that we may come up with is highly problematic. If you look at it from the point of view of purely the GCC member countries, you might think, and apparently that's what they may implicitly or explicitly have in mind, they might think of being capable of isolating themselves. Okay, let the region around us go in flames. We will be able to fix our countries and keep peace nevertheless. I personally believe that this might be feasible for the United Arab Emirates. It is a bit the strategy that has always been pursued by Dubai of being a convenient place for everybody, and therefore no one has an interest in rocking the boat, okay? Because everybody has an interest in having Dubai the way it is, and we know it. It may be extended to the Emirates as a whole. I find it very difficult to believe that Saudi Arabia can isolate itself from the rest of the region. The country is much too complex and populous and intertwined with the rest of the region to manage to be indifferent to what happens in Yemen or in Egypt, or for that matter in the Sudan or Syria. So it is difficult to believe that the GCC countries can prosper if they are surrounded by failed states. And at the same time, it is not clear that they are capable of accepting anything else but failed states around themselves, because they don't seem to have a proposition, a strategic view of how they might redefine, redesign the region in a positive fashion. I'm usually known as being an inveterate optimist, so I find myself in a slightly unusual position with but in fact, at the moment, I must say, it's very difficult to be any optimist at all about the future of the region. Thank you.